Welcome to the 6th webinar in the NAW series, How Technology Will Transform Wholesale Distribution. Today's topic is Value-Added Services as a Survival Strategy. Real value isn't free. My name is Ian Heller with Distribution Strategy Group, and I'll be your co-host today along with my business partner, Jonathan Bine, PhD. This series was developed under the leadership of the NAW Institute for Distribution Excellence, which is the research arm of the National Association of Wholesaler-Distributors, excuse me. For those of you who may not know, NAW represents tens of thousands of distribution firms and dozens of lines of trade that make up the wonderful and massive wholesale distribution industry. NAW is known for its federal government relations program in Washington, D.C., its political action committee, the NAW Service Corporation, which provides group purchasing benefits, and the NAW Institute's research activities like this one. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items to help you participate in today's webinar. By default, you've joined the presentation in listening mode using your computer speakers. If you would prefer to join by phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and then you'll be able to see the dial-in information. You can submit questions at any time by typing them in the cleverly named questions pane in your attendee control panel. We'll answer some questions at the end and some along the way. Today's webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a follow-up email with a link to view the recording. Also, the detailed research report that this webinar was based on is available now at www.naw.org/report6. That's naw.org/report6. You can download any of the reports in this series or listen to the accompanying webinars by visiting naw.org/howtech will transform. Those links are on your screen. Now I want to bring in my business partner, the brilliant and trustworthy doctor of distribution, Jonathan Bine, PhD. How are you today, Jonathan?
Well and flattered. How are you?
Well, I'm not flattered, but I'm well. I'm doing very well. And I'm looking forward to a great conversation with you today. It's interesting, we say real value isn't free, but one of the problems we've identified is it is free, right? I mean, distributors are giving away all this value, right?
All too often.
Right, and so this is our agenda today. First of all, we're going to talk about the role of services in technology disruption. Secondly, we're going to make the argument for why most services should be paid, or at least you should find a way to account for payments for those services. We'll review results of a survey of distribution executives and offer some excerpts from 9 executive interviews that we did that are just fascinating, talk about implications and next steps. But before we get started, I want to thank the sponsor of today's webinar, because without them, this research and analysis would not be possible. That sponsor is Unilog, and I'm delighted to have Scott Freimeyer with us today. He's the Senior Vice President of Marketing from Unilog. They are a regular sponsor, as some of you know. So Scott, thank you for that. And please spend a few minutes describing how Unilog can help distribution companies. Welcome, my friend.
Hey, thank you, Ian, Jonathan. Good to be with you guys again, and always proud to be partnered with NAW and DSG on this project. For those of you who are not familiar with Unilog, we are the provider of powerful, affordable e-commerce solutions for mid-market B2B companies, probably very much like yourselves. So that means that we can help build your e-commerce site for you, integrated with your back-end ERP, and then provide you the platform to manage that on an ongoing basis and build out your digital branch. So we give you everything from the content management system, the PIM to manage your catalog, obviously the commerce functionality, analytics, the whole shebang. You show on the slide there, we're recently covered in a bit of research by Andy Hoare with Paradigm B2B. Andy is widely regarded as an expert in the field of B2B e-commerce, and he evaluated, I believe it was about 16 vendors this year, and Unilog took home the most gold medals in his research of any of the vendors for e-commerce platforms. Most overall medal count. So we fared very well in his research. I think that just goes to the point of we have a very powerful, robust platform, but at a very good price point that makes it an attractive total cost of ownership. On the next slide, if you'd like a copy of that research, that Paradigm B2B Combine, go ahead. My email's right there, scott.freimeyer@unilogcorp.com. Just go ahead and shoot me an email right now. Let me know. I'd be happy to send you a free copy of the research if you're looking for an e-commerce platform right now and you want to compare some of the options out there. I will throw, you know what, Ian, I'm going to throw another option out to our audience today that I haven't done yet. But if anybody would like a a free audit of their e-commerce website, a quick review by yours truly of your e-commerce site, and just a little bit of feedback on how it stacks up against other sites in the industry, some areas where you might be able to capitalize on improvement. I will throw that out to the first, I'm going to say they take a little bit to do. So the first 5 people that shoot me an email, scott.freimeyer@unilogcorp.com. If you're interested, I will go ahead and give you a free no strings attached audit of your site, and we'll sit down and review the results with you, and just hopefully give you some actionable information you can take back and put to use. So thank you again. I'm looking forward to the call today, Ian.
That's a really generous offer, Scott. And I will tell you that we interact with Scott on a regular basis, and he's very generous with his expertise, which is considerable. So I would encourage you to reach out to him if you have any questions. And the free audit, that's a surprise to me, but what a great offer. And my guess is you've already got 20 emails in your inbox, Scott.
It's the holiday season. I couldn't help.
Great. Well, Santa Scott, thanks so much. Great to see you again. We appreciate you sponsoring this event. Okay, so we're going to jump into the content. And the first thing I want to address is, why are we talking about services in a series in technology adoption? And frankly, they're inextricably wound together, because technology is enabling distributors to deliver a lot of new services, which may be e-procurement, could be online account management, mobile apps, delivery tracking, order and delivery and shipping verifications, et cetera. There are all these services that are delivered online that are really important to customers. And 2, industry disruptors are offering a lot more advanced digital services, but by and large, they're not offering services that require people to perform. And that's a really important difference, and it provides an area for distributors to differentiate. So later on, we're going to talk about, why doesn't Amazon Business, eBay Business and Industrial, et cetera, offer product transformation, like putting together cables or kitting or labeling. And why are they not likely to do that? And why is that a potential advantage for distributors? So make sure you stick around to hear that part of this discussion. And then 3, this is really important. Distributors today look overpriced in online shopping comparisons. And increasingly, those shopping comparisons are including these pure digital players. That's a real problem. And it's made worse by 2 factors. One is that distributors have tiered pricing, and they tend to show their highest price first, and that's the one they show online. But secondly, they bundle all the services into those product prices, and they say, well, I'm going to give the services away, and I'm going to get that money back by adding it to the product price. The problem is, when people are shopping online, there's no context to those SKUs. It doesn't say it comes with technical support and all this other stuff. You just look overpriced. And so there are increasingly reasons for distributors to unbundle the product and the service and price them separately. One of them is so that we don't look so high in online price comparisons. Now, I did a lot of research in the process of preparing this report. There's not a lot out there on value-added services. The NAED has a great brochure for their members. And then Frank Hurt wrote a book, which I found on Amazon, and you can too, called The Distributor's Fee-Based Services Manifesto. Frank is not paying for this endorsement. I just think it's a great book. And he has, you could do a whole presentation out of the book. I have a couple slides, but one of the things he talks about is the advantages of paid service. And he says, look, when you start offering a paid service, people aren't taking it for granted. You become a customer advocate, a consultant. You're not waiting in the lobby like a salesperson. You're being invited into the back because you're solving business problems for them. Your services can directly impact the customer's bottom line, which means you become more important to those services, which is an important form of differentiation. Fee-based services are just thought of differently. If you're paying for it, you think of it differently. And I've seen this throughout my career at big distribution companies, where when you stop giving it away and you put a price tag on it, even if a lot of times you still give it away, but at least you're establishing a value, and you can demonstrate what that value is and measure it, and maybe even show it as a line item, even if you're crediting against it, you are changing the way that customers think about those services. And I'm not saying you should give them all away. I'm saying in many cases, you're going to say, look, I charge $50 per emergency call, but hey, national account customer, you get these calls for free. And now they're perceiving value out of that, for example, rather than just be something free you do for everyone. Fee-based services open doors to new customer contacts because you are helping different people in that customer account, which means you're broadening the depth and breadth of your relationship. And finally, it opens the door to undiscussed customer issues. And one of the examples Frank uses is if you have technical trainers, when they're training your customers' technical people, all kinds of issues come up about services they're getting from current suppliers, their product experiences, et cetera, and you're in a great position to learn a lot of information you would not learn if you weren't helping customers with these fee-paid services. So he lays out a really great case in the book. I encourage you to read it. He also discusses 8 ways that you create financial value for the customer. I won't go through all of them, but basically these are ways that your services can either grow sales or reduce costs for customers, and he goes into each one of these in a great deal of depth. So I suggest you get this book. I learned a lot from it, and I think you will as well. Now, here's a problem from free services, and we're going to hear a lot from John Schweig today. I've known John for a long time. He was SVP of strategy for Grainger for many years, and he's currently the chairman of the board of Blackhawk Industrial. He's in private equity. He's on the board of several other distribution companies. And here's what he pointed out was a problem with free services. This has been a worst of all worlds scenario because reps aren't paying for the cost of those services. And so they give them away like candy. This raises costs and cheapens and commoditizes the service in the eyes of the customer. So this happens all the time. So I remember one distributor I worked for, I was talking to a branch manager, and Jonathan, I'm sure you've heard these kinds of anecdotes as well. And the branch manager was complaining that he had to have drivers in early because he had a 6:30 a.m. delivery commitment for one of his customers. I said, 6:30 a.m., well, that's pretty aggressive. What's the story behind that? Well, my account manager promised it to him, and now I have to deliver it. Well, they weren't getting more margin for that. They weren't getting fees for that. It incurred cost, right? They needed more capital equipment and they needed more labor. It was very hard on the branch to perform this service, but it cost the account manager nothing. And I bet you I could come up with a dozen examples where I've seen distributors give away services because they're not being charged for them. They're not on the hook for them. And anytime you have a product that's free, then your potential for that product is essential, or service is essentially infinite, right? By your demand and supply curves. So, I mean, have you run into this with your clients over the years?
Absolutely. I mean, you could find more than a dozen examples in one client of
Right.
this type of behavior, this
Yeah.
type of value diluting behavior.
Yeah, and so this is one example, and we'll go into some later, but I mean, free services cause problems, and one of them is because according to traditional supply and demand theory, if the product is free, the demand is off the charts and technically infinite, right? So you just cause problems and burden the cost or burden the organization with a cost because someone's benefiting from them who doesn't have to pay for them, either the customer or the account manager. Okay, let's jump into the survey. So we had a really great survey. We had 2 or more responses from 19 different product verticals, although if you look at most of them, they come from hardline goods like construction, general MRO, electrical, JNC, hydraulics, et cetera. But we had a lot of different categories of respondents. The audience was very senior, so we had 79% in general management or VP roles, another 5 in director, and then everyone else was more junior than that, but overall, this is a very senior level audience. The annual revenue ranges went from $2 million a year to over $15 billion a year, and the median annual sales was $80 million. So I think this is pretty representative of the wholesale distribution industry. We asked which categories of value-added services do the respondents offer today. Everybody answered this question. And what's interesting to me is on the far left, the most frequently offered service was order notifications, which is a digital service. On the far right was the least frequently offered type of service, which are advanced digital services such as e-procurement. And then everything else is in the middle. And one thing I'd like to point out, and we have definitions of these services that we explain to the respondents in the white paper. So make sure the research report, make sure you download the research report as well. But as you can see, a whole bunch of these involve some type of product transformation, right? So assemblies and kitting and engineering services and repairs and rental and design and configuration. So distributors are adding value to the product, or they're adding value to the customer with things like customer training and logistics and delivery. And you'll notice that for the most part, these are not services that the big disruptors offer. So distributors are already offering a lot of this service today, but as you'll learn, they're not doing a great job really building processes or marketing around these services. Now, interestingly, when we asked how important is the competitive advantage you get from your value-added services, I mean, it was off the charts, right? So you have, what is that, 70% say it's extremely important or very important. Jonathan, does this number surprise you, or do you think this is a survey bias?
Well, I think we've talked about the survey respondents. The survey respondents here have in our view, more mature perspective on
Right.
services than the average distributor. In other words, if we took 92 distributors among the 30,000 NAW members randomly, and we looked at some of the things that we're evaluating in this survey, I think we'd find sort of less mature or less sophisticated responses on average. So yes, this number does surprise me, and I think it's indicative of a group that cares about service, and that's why they took the survey.
Yeah, right. So but almost nobody said not very important. So
That's right.
I would say even in a normalized data set, you probably wouldn't get a double-digit response. You said it's not very important. I mean, services are clearly important, at least to this group. They're saying they're differentiating, they're part of the competitive advantage. And when we asked them to describe their plans for value-added services, this group anyway is planning to make them more important. So 37% is projecting a dramatic expansion of services. 44 said some enhancement, and only 1 out of 5 thought there would be relatively little change going forward. So this group is probably ahead of the curve, like you said, and it looks like they intend to expand their lead. We asked how COVID has affected your value-added services strategy, and what's interesting here is there's about 50-50 between people who thought it made services more important and those who thought it either made it less important. That was 1 in 20, and how many said it hasn't really affected our strategy. So COVID has had, for a little over half, has made services more important. And if you read through some of the comments, which we're not going to share here, but are in the report, the people who said it's made it less important or has made it not much more important are talking about things like, hey, we're just trying to fill orders right now, or, COVID's hurt our business, so we're not worried about it too much. Now, this is interesting because we do this analysis on our own a lot, but in the survey we said, or we asked, do you have a tab on the homepage of your website called services or something similar? Now, I think this is an important thing for distributors to have, although not everyone agrees. What's your perspective on a services or solutions tab, Jonathan?
If people don't know about it, it's going to be harder for them to find it. So therefore, you have to do things to make them know about it.
Yeah, and I think also it provides a discipline, right? If you have an organized presentation of services on your website, well, you're going to have to go through and do some copywriting, and you're going to have to go through and think about how you articulate that service. And you're probably developing copy you could use in sales collateral and presentations, et cetera. So I think it's a good exercise. And having done this before, usually a little over a third actually have a services tab, maybe 35, maybe 40% in some cases. In this case, it was 48%. So I think this is, again, an audience that's more interested in services, but still less than half have this services or solutions tab on their website. And we think it's just a good practice to get into, but do make sure somebody owns it, because we also run into cases where people have services they have a services tab and services underneath it, but actually people in the company aren't really aware of what's on there, and that's no good either. We also asked,
we have a question at this point, by the way, really
Okay.
good question. So,
All right.
which I think is going to be relevant to a lot of folks listening on the call today. We perform repair and field installation services to customers, along with being a distributor of parts and equipment. We do a fair amount of phone support and problem solving for customers, which they now expect. How might we transition to fee for service? Charge a fee and waive it for existing accounts in good standing? You want to take this one?
Yeah, I think you can grandfather in existing clients. You can start saying, look, we're only going to offer this service for people who do more than $50,000 a year with us, or whatever your threshold is, and encourage people to get over that threshold so that they continue to get that service. I mean, I think once you brand it, you can start distinguishing between what's the branded service and the non-branded service, and over time differentiate the value that you add via the branded versus the non-branded. I think you are going to have to grandfather some people in there because they're used to it, but you should not let it continue to go on for free, and you should fight the good fight to get to a fee paid state over time for the bulk of the value that you offer with that technical support. That's my view.
Yeah.
Do you have a different opinion?
No, I think that's great. I would just say, as it relates to the question, there may be a number of services today that you will not be able to charge for in the future. You may introduce, as you said, Ian, a branded version or a premium version along with the free version. So then you have a freemium model. Or you might choose a certain segment of your customer base who's eligible for this, and you're saying potentially by volume or some other basis.
Yeah, what I discovered over the years is people need to be able to understand your explanation for why you're making that change.
Mhm.
And so if you say, well, look, we're basing it on how much people do in sales with us per year because we can't give it away to everybody, most people will understand that. I mean, you're going to make some people angry no matter what you do, but you can't react to the outliers, right? And you want a reasonable explanation, and you want to not surprise anybody with it. This is the kind of thing you announce months in advance or a year in advance, and then give people a chance to earn their way into it or give them some credits or some grandfather time. So I think, don't surprise people, have a reasonable basis for why you charge for it now that people can accept and understand.
We're actually working with a large distributor right now on services strategy, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're making this service available for customers who've been with them for more than a year, and
Right.
we're doing a certain volume.
Okay, we also asked, how do you market your value-added services to customers online? Now, remember, this is the group that says that services are strategically important to their differentiation. But if you look at the 35% who said they have little to no info on their website, or the 21% who say that the information is scattered around their website, that means 56% of this population doesn't have, actually more, because there's another column, roughly 60% doesn't have some great explanation or listing of their services. So there's work to do here to market services more effectively. And as you'll see, we think it's really important to differentiation. So distributors need to get good at taking credit for the services they offer today and explaining them in a compelling fashion. Now, we also asked, does your sales force earn commissions on value-added services revenue in addition to commissions on product sales? And of course, you have to charge for services in order to pay commissions on them separately, because otherwise you don't have the data. And as you might expect, then 2/3 do not pay commissions on value-added services, and 27% said that they do. So, I mean, this didn't really surprise me. We did ask some comments on this question, and I won't read them all, just the ones that are bolded. One says, at present, we don't charge separately for our services, so the reps get commissions on the product only. Number 5, only for the services that we charge for, which is, I guess, depending on the degree to which you charge for services might be the right play. Number 10, as we move from offering fee-based training, we will be looking at offering sales commissions. So I think this was top of mind and people were aware of the need to do this, but they have to charge for them before they can commission for them. We also asked, what kind of documentation do you have for your value-added services that are taught to the employees who do the work? So distributors are known as great operators, and a lot of distributors, they might be ISO certified or at least follow good process documentation. And so they tend to have a lot of process documentation around, picking will calls and shipping orders and billing customers and, reconciling payments and all that stuff. What you see here is there's not nearly as much documentation for value-added services. So if you look at the red and the purple, it was about 36% that either didn't document anything or documented a little bit. And then it was 60% who did some or almost all. I thought this was actually better than I expected it to be, but there's still more work to do to ensure that there's proper documentation of services in our view. Okay, financial reporting did not perform as well. So which of these statements best describes your financial reporting around your value-added services? And so about half said, well, we really don't do any, and 35% said they track some, and 16% have a full P&L. So this is, again, the strategic dissonance. We know services are important. We think that we differentiate competitively with them, but we really don't have proper measurements. We're not charging for them. We're not paying commissions for them. We don't have that much process documentation. We don't have measurements built around them either for performance or for profit and loss. So it's just not, there's a lot of work to do here. So this asks, and this is related, is there an individual in your company who is specifically responsible for value-added services? Well, if there's nobody responsible for it, then it's no surprise, I guess, that you don't have performance measurements or financial measurements on them or good process documentation. There's only 32% said they do have someone responsible for that. There were people who don't think this is even a good idea, and that's a fair discussion. We think it is a good idea, and 62% don't have anyone responsible for the value-added services specifically. Now, when you get underneath that with some of the comments, the bolded ones, number 1, we're developing a plan to centralize our services business under one individual. Well, that's good. Number 3, each branch manager is responsible for their own value-added services and P&L, except for company-wide services like e-commerce. Strikes me as a fair solution, at least a step in the right direction. 5, while the concept is compelling on paper, I've tried that before and I'm not a fan of the concept. And this person very articulately explained why they don't think it's a good idea. You can read the full comment there or in the report. Number 6, each of our 9 departments has a manager responsible for the value-added services that their department provides. So there are a lot of different ways of looking at this. Jonathan, how often do you interact with a distributor who actually has someone who's got a title like director of services or general manager of services or et cetera?
Rarely, and the work we do is from the 2 to 15 billion or larger. So we really are seeing that range, and it's rare. I would say that the third comment there, each branch manager is responsible for their own value-added services. It's going to create it could create a bit of a free-for-all. It could create that undisciplined environment around managing services where you end up with a proliferation of services, potentially the quality of the services is not managed well, et cetera. Maybe these folks are doing it well. I should be fair to them, but I think that's a potential risk in that approach.
I think you generally, you take it as the whole, right? It's like, well, the responsibility is split up and the financial measurements aren't there and the commissions aren't there and the process documentation isn't there. And it's still out of step with this story that we differentiate on our value-added services, right? And then this point adds to it, how do you measure the quality of your value-added services? And 47%, so the top left blue and the top right red, we don't measure service performance, or we only measure basic customer service, like will calls encounter was the full question. On the bottom left, we spot check our services. That leaves 22%, right, who say we do full analytics on services. So this is quality of performance. So how consistently can you possibly deliver your services if you aren't measuring them? I mean, the old saw, you can't manage what you don't measure is true. And if you're not measuring the quality of your services, and why would you not? I mean, you really need to know how well you're doing these value-added services, just like you need to know how long people are holding on the phone or how long people are waiting on the counter.
Well, and that's one of the challenges when you ask somebody about their value-added services, and then you say, what is the value of your value-added service? Nobody can answer the question.
Right.
Or they can answer it qualitatively, but they can't say, here's what the economic impact to my customer is of the value-added service that I'm providing.
Right.
So in general, people don't know the value of their own value-added services.
Yeah, and so they can't demonstrate them to their customers. We'll talk about that because we have some executives who offered some comments on that when we interviewed them. And as you might guess, how do you decide to add or terminate a specific value-added service? In blue, they evolve organically over time, which means there's no process. Don't know probably means there's no process. So
I think blue is about really the ad hoc aspect of how services get started and evolve. And so again, the risk in this is that you got a customer that needs something and the branch says, well, hey, we got somebody that can do that. We have the knowledge, we have the expertise. And so you do that, but then it kind of gets in a cul-de-sac at that branch. It doesn't scale. It's dependent on that person. And then all of the other sort of ad hoc things that go along with that are resident in it. So it doesn't end up being monetized.
Yeah, I mean, you got to productize it to monetize it, right? So you need to, if you don't at least brand it, at least name it and standardize how you do it from location to location. And, just as, I mean, manufacturers have product development processes, and there aren't a lot of successful manufacturers who don't follow a pretty rigorous process for developing products. The distributor version of that is service, but distributors, for the most part, are not using a service development process, although there are some notable exceptions. Every now and then we run into someone who does have a director of services, and sometimes those people come out of manufacturing. Now we asked for some comments about this. The bolded ones, number 1, value-added services are often regionalized, not well managed at the corporate level, and come out of a sales territory need or want. That's that ad hoc thing that you're talking about, Jonathan. Number 3, customer surveys help us get a pulse on what services are valued and what new services should be introduced. That's great. People aren't doing a lot of surveys, as we'll see in a minute. Number 5, we're implementing a new ERP to help us analyze our true costs and our value-added services. That's good. Number 8, we initiated an ROI evaluation process to evaluate them. Number 10, which probably describes a lot of distributors, we are somewhere in between a process and shooting from the hip. And I would say that probably sums it up for a lot of distributors, right?
Absolutely.
They probably have some review. They're probably looking at them at an annual budget meeting or whatever, but that's not the same as having a full process.
Well, by the way, there, in this situation where the need is stimulated by a customer request, if you have a process, you could fulfill that need, perhaps on an ad hoc basis or a one-off basis. But then you could raise the question: is this something that we should be offering more broadly? Right? If you have a process, then you have a framework for evaluating whether that should be a more generally offered service.
Yeah, I mean, you're not only burdened with services that maybe aren't producing for you, you're not extrapolating and leveraging the ones that are.
Right.
So we asked, when is the last time you conducted a customer survey to get feedback on your value-added services? And what you'll see here, the big red one, never. Green, more than 3 years ago, 9%.
Which is never.
Which is, yeah, right, for the use of all the use of do you. Purple, I don't know, that's another 9%. So that's what 55% are basically more than 3 years ago or never, or I don't know. And 46%, which I thought was pretty high, were within the last 3 years or within the last year. And so clearly there's just not this cadence of gathering information about services. And so this sort of sums up the strategic dissonance, which is the claim is that services are essential to our strategy. But for many distributors, they're not measuring them. No one's responsible for them. They don't have financial measurements. So they're not measuring performance. Nobody's responsible for them. They don't have financial measurements. They're not measuring their service quality. They're not defining processes, and they rarely survey their customers about their service needs. So there's just this dissonance between the claimed importance. And here's why we think it's so important. This is what I was talking about at the beginning of the conversation about these third-party marketplaces, these disruptors. Okay, so I mean, a regular distributor has a combination of fixed costs and variable costs. And as sales grow, they build some leverage between their total costs and their sales, so they become, more profitable as they deleverage off their fixed cost base, and variable costs go up, but not at the same rate, hopefully, anyway. However, a third-party marketplace, so if you're Amazon Business, for example, they have the fixed costs of the platform. But think about this: if Amazon added the SKUs that you carry, all of the SKUs that you carry, but you're doing the picking and packing and the shipping, and you're doing that out of your inventory in your warehouse with your labor, moving things around with your forklift, and generating the pick lists on your computer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're not affecting their fixed costs at all. Amazon Business is simply billing the customer, and you're giving them greater assortment. They're doing the demand generation, which also doesn't change because they built these demand generation tools. They don't need to spend more on demand generation because you've added your 50,000 SKUs. They don't have any more inventory. There's no working capital that they have to add. That's your working capital. They don't have to expand their warehouse space because you're warehousing it for them. So what they see is that profit goes up at an extraordinarily rapid rate. This is like a software model, right? Once you build it, every additional version that you sell of that, or a copy you sell of that software, is free. The same thing is true in a third-party marketplace where their fixed costs don't go up in volume. So look at the rate of growth that this line has over the fixed cost base versus the traditional model. Well, the third-party marketplaces love this model, and it explains one of the reasons they don't offer these value-added services, because it screws up their ability to leverage off of their cost base. So they're doing everything they can to avoid adding any of these variable costs. Now, what this means strategically to distributors is that marketplaces become increasingly profitable over time. So distributors are going to have to continue to avoid competing on price because you can't win, because they are getting more profitable over time. Secondly, marketplaces avoid adding value-added services. So distributors now have a bunch of white space that they can compete in by adding value-added services. So stuff that takes people to do, things that add variable cost to the distributor, provided you can offset them with revenues. If you just add them and don't charge for them, then you've just made your profitability problem worse. But if you get good at them and you add value-added services, then you're differentiating and adding value in ways that these platform models can't. And then finally, marketplaces don't include services in their product prices. And so distributors need to stop bundling services into their product prices, both to make this second point work and also so they don't look so unfavorable in online price comparisons. This is a really important point, Jonathan. Is this clear what I'm saying?
I think it's spot on. Stop bundling services into product prices. I mean, that's worth the price of the admission here for the listeners.
Well, it's
And
free, so.
well, point taken, which is on point for our topic, right?
That's
Um,
right.
somebody paid for this.
Right.
Anyhow, but the other thing is that if we look at what happens with marketplaces, they mask value, they hide value, they reduce differentiation, they level the playing field. So the three things that you have on the right side here, avoid competing on price, compete with value-added services, stop bundling services into product prices, is how to expose value, right? How to expose value and how to monetize value, and that's really key as we move more towards digital, whether it's your own digital or somebody else's marketplace.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've, I think, shown the way to do this, at least, and we didn't make this up, right? We're getting these answers from distributors. Put someone in charge of services. Make sure you take credit for the services that you do. And that, it sounds oversimplified to say put a services or solutions tab on your homepage, but it's going to drive some action around documenting your services and explaining them. Put processes in to develop them, to manage the performance of them, to manage the financial return of them. Treat them rigorously or manage them rigorously. And that brings me to some of the input we got from executives. So I've got a couple of pages of these, but one senior executive at a large distributor pointed out that Home Depot is actually a bigger threat to their customers than is Amazon Business, because Home Depot not only offers the products, but also the logistics, locations, and job management capabilities, along with great digital capabilities. Home Depot says they've got the 5th largest e-commerce site in the United States, right? And they just bought HD Supply, and they're getting more aggressive in MRO. So I think, we talk a lot about Amazon Business, but Home Depot in many ways is more dangerous to more distributors. And they do offer a lot of those services. I talked to Glenn Massline, CEO of Massline Electronics, and he said, he'll do a plant tour of a customer, and where he sees people doing manual labor or pre-production labor, he'll say, we can do those steps faster than you can. And he'll say, can't you put those resources to better use? We'll do the kitting and the bagging and the tagging and the pre-assembly stuff. And he says most of their services are billable. We talked to Renata Morgan, who's the general manager of business administration at Century AC Supply. And they're very rigorous. They actually do a voice of the customer system to get feedback on not only what they're doing, but what future services they might introduce. And she says, look, there are going to be 2 paths that distributors go by: commodity-based product sellers and value-added service providers. And if you're a commodity product seller, you better be able to compete with really low-ball online sellers. Talked to Matt Bootsier at Palmer Donovan. He said our sales reps need to understand how our customers make money and what they're doing to grow their business to help them identify what's important to them. Knowing how to read and understand financial statements is critical. And they're actually developing this model that you can present with Excel, where you ask the customer a bunch of questions, and it produces a number in terms of the savings that they would get if they consolidated purchases with Palmer Donovan. It's pretty clever. And they've got services on their website like Track My Truck, so that you got a big delivery coming, because they sell building products, and you can arrange for the crew to be ready when the truck gets there, so you're not wasting labor. And they've got self-service returns, where you take a couple of pictures of the item that you want to return, and you get a credit, and Palmer Donovan picks up the material the next day. So they've got some pretty cool services that they're working on for customers. Talked to Randy Bro, who's the president of Motion Industries. So this is a big company, right? $6 billion in revenue, 550 branches, and 45 repair and service centers. And look, they do a lot of service revenue. He said, you've got to bring some measurements to your services to standardized processes, or you will not produce consistent quality from one location to another. You have to measure both the profitability and quality of your service. He had a lot more to say that's in the research report, as did all these executives. And then Jim Markison, who's the VP of Corporate Marketing at Tesco Technologies, he laid out sort of a clear path to getting this done. First, be clear about what services are a differentiator and which ones you do because it's expected, right? Some of them we have to offer because competitors do it. The only thing worse than a smart competitor is a dumb competitor, because they give away value. Make sure your system can process orders from your service offering. A lot of ERPs, particularly for small companies, are set up for products, and so you need to make sure that they can bill for services. Number 3, determine how you will sell your services. Can your current team sell them, or do you need some service expert SMEs, subject matter experts, to sell them? 4, how will you incentivize and compensate the team selling the services. 5, plan how you'll market and promote these services. And then 6, determine if these are for existing customers or if it's for a new segment. So I thought this was a very thoughtful and strategic way. Known Jim for a long time. He's a very thoughtful and strategic executive, so I wasn't surprised to get this good quality input from him. And then in terms of the executive feedback, we'll finish up with John Schweig, with whom we started. And he sent me a long note that said, distributors need to have an answer to disruption, right? What's your strategy for e-commerce, even if you're not going to compete, at least make a deliberate decision. To, you have to have a clear-eyed view about the need for a service strategy, or distributors have a clear-eyed view about the need for a service strategy, but they're understandably all over the map in terms of implementation, because it really hasn't been that strategic and that essential to survival really until recently. And then as daunting as this all seems, distributors can tackle this challenge, and I love this, by applying the same rigor and skills around product line management to services. So, you know how to manage products. You probably have product managers or category managers. Well, you probably should have some service managers too, who take ownership over this, and who are accountable and who are presenting to the executive team and the CEO, the board, on services results, just like their product line counterparts do around their categories. And his 5-step process is establish a clear service portfolio, including addition and sunset processes, so you're introducing and ending them appropriately. Develop a pricing strategy, so you know you're going to price them. Document and measure service processes and costs. Define leadership roles and accountability, and determine whom to offer services to, and define sales commission policies to reinforce. So this is the blueprint, right? So you got one from Jim, you got one from John. They have a lot of overlap. The material's in here, and it's in this research report that we did as well. All right, so you got a couple of questions for me, Jonathan?
Yeah, we do. So one is a comment from Tim. He says, in addition to not bundling services into product pricing, the good players, and I'm adding this, will go the other direction. They'll focus on services and bundle in the product price. This is true differentiation. What do you think?
Somebody told me, I think it was Jim Markison, who predicts that ultimately distributors will sell services, and primarily services, and the products will be attached to those services. Rather, he thinks that's the end game for distributors, that it'll be more about selling services and the products go with it, rather than selling products and having the services go with it. He thinks that's a healthier and differentiating model. So, I mean, I don't know if that's the end game, but I think moving in that direction, like Tim was suggesting, is a good idea. What do you think?
Well, it's a perfect lead into the next question. So I'll answer your question once I pose this question. Do you see a day when distributors focus more on providing services and only providing the hard to get products, avoid competing with the marketplaces on the easily procured items? From John.
Yeah, I think we've seen the end of the hard to find product. Right. I mean, when's the last time you went on Amazon and couldn't find what you were looking for? I mean, if anything, you have the paradox of choice, where there are too many types of products, not too few. So, I mean, unless you've got something really obscure, and I don't think the market for that is huge, then I think, the hard to find products are no longer hard to find. They're pretty much all easy to find. Go ahead.
I think it depends on the sector. And so part of what we're going to be doing, just as a preview into the research for this coming year, this year we've really laid out the problems, hopefully in Technicolor. This next year, we're going to be looking at how you fight back. And as part of that, we're going to be characterizing what do things look like in different segments of the industry. So to John's question, do you see a day when distributors focus more on providing services? It depends on the industry. For office products, and I'm painting with a broad brush, but for office products, maybe not so much. For configuring a drive, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of value add in configuring a drive. So I think part of the answer is going to depend on the particular segment and what is the propensity for value add in what you're doing in that particular segment.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You can only go so far in broad strokes and recommending strategies, right? Because it's dependent on the market and the business model that you follow, et cetera. I mean, I think if your business model is selling stuff online right now, clearly you're in the bullseye of some major players. I think if you have a lot of value add at the local level, like Motion Industries does, I mean, they're rewinding motors. And by the way, that business is counter-cyclical economically, which helps them, right? Because people get stuff repaired when times are a little lean, because it's cheaper than replacing them. So, I think it's a good point. I think you're going to see I don't know if the end game is going to be what Jim says, where distributors primarily sell services, but I do think it's going that direction.
Good. We got another really good question from Nick. We do not charge for any value-added services. We have very few to begin with that we offer. How do you decide what's worth pursuing, starting to charge for? And what if your competition does not charge for the same? So how do you figure out what to pick? And what if your competition is not charging?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, you can't charge for something that none of your competitors charge for unless you do it better, right? So I would say, first of all, start with customer needs. And that doesn't mean you go out and ask customers exactly what services you should add. You should ask them what their pain is, because in fact, when I was talking to Renata Morgan at Century AC, she said, well, Henry Ford is supposed to have said, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they'd have said a faster horse, right? And so I think to some degree, you have to understand that customers don't always know the solutions, but they're very familiar with their pain. So I think you need to go out there and ask them, what's costing you productivity? What are your frustrations? You need to have enough of those discussions, make enough sales calls, do enough research, whether it's, focus groups or surveys or phone calls or whatever, that you begin to develop an opinion around how you can help these customers. Because if you can centralize the pain cure, then you can do it cheaper than any of these customers can cure that pain on their own, because you'll develop economies of scale.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is great, Ian. That first part of what you're going to do is discovery.
Right.
And that could lead, after you've got discovery and you've got a hypothesis, that could lead to something that looks more like a quantitative survey. So you find out, what segments of your business want services, how much they want them, et cetera. But you have to start with that discovery. Next question, you used the word survival in the presentation title. Does that mean distributors will not survive without documenting / marketing and hopefully charging for value-added services?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a provocative title on purpose, right? I think that if you are just focused on selling product, you're in a bad place. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, some kind of services are necessary. I think it is a survival issue in the long run for distributors. I think, because, the stock market, the analysts used to reward distributors for being more Amazon-like, right? More digital, more website. The problem is they became more Amazon-like. And you're not going to be better at selling a very, very broad array of goods at relatively low prices in a really, really great user-friendly website than Amazon, or frankly Google Shopping, or Walmart.com, or Alibaba, or these other, although Alibaba is also a sourcing place and a selling place for distributors as well. But in any case, you're not going to be better at it than those companies are. They're technology companies. And I think this is one of the things to remember. All those companies I just mentioned are not just logistics players. They're not just merchants. They're world-class technology companies, and distributors for the most part are not. Well, exclusively are not, right? They're just not technology companies. They may be good with technology, but they're not technology companies. And so to try to compete with a technologically based solution with a technology company is doomed. So yes, I think it's a survival issue, at least for most distributors. What do you think, Jonathan? It's a really good question.
I think it's a great question. I think the value-added services is also part of a broader value strategy. And I think it's imperative that distributors in this new decade, with all of the disruption, for all the things that Ian said, really look also at their broader value strategy, including value proposition. Where are we really differentiated? And then the value-added services probably are 30 to 40% of that discussion.
What's the rest?
Value prop.
Okay.
Right, value prop and understanding economic impact and that sort of thing. So,
okay.
Final question. Do you see distributors facing cultural hurdles from their sales teams when fee for services becomes a thing? Much like credit managers are seen as sales prevention, much like credit managers are seen as sales prevention. So what do you think, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I think your change management is going to have to be pretty careful around this. And this is related to the earlier question about how do I start charging for services I used to give away for free, right? And so I think you have to productize the service, you have to improve it, you have to do something new, ideally, and say, grandfather in existing customers, set levels of certain sizes. And I do think if you're charging for these services and paying sales reps commissions on it, it's a much easier discussion than if you're just charging customers and not paying sales reps commission on it, right? So I would do it collaboratively with the sales force to the degree that you can. But hey, like John Schweig said, they've been giving away services like candy for a long time. And it's going to take a while to break that sugar habit. So I think there are ways you can work through it collaboratively with most of them. And in some cases, it's going to be an issue. But if harkening back to the previous question, if it's a survival strategy, it doesn't do anybody any good to not take these steps over time, ultimately.
Actually, a question from John. Perhaps offering and charging for services would seem less dramatic if we recognize that we've always done this. We all provide curation / assortment, stocking, merchandising, delivery, and have charged for that all along. It's semantics to say that our markup for these services is bundling it with the product.
Well, I think anytime you're breaking out the charge for other services and you're unbundling, that that's not semantics. That's a different pricing column, right? Or a different line item on the invoice. I do think generally what distributors do is a service, right? We're not making anything. So you could say that, hey, making products available and delivering them to you is a service. I think the reason I really put the term value-added service in is it's stuff that goes beyond the simple transaction, because those disruptors do the same thing. They also have a lot of products. They also make them available for sale. They also deliver them quickly. So I think the value-added services are the things that you do in addition to that basic product availability and transaction service offering. So I don't think it's just semantics. I do think you're talking about adding line items onto the invoice, and that is a pretty big cultural change. What's your view?
I think the cultural change is huge. I think it's akin to the cultural change in getting digital offerings going, right?
Or pricing, or pricing. Right.
Yeah, I mean, any number of distributors have struggled with digital offerings because they're not comping their sales reps on stuff that comes through e-commerce, and that is just a fatal mistake. So if you don't incent it, you're not going to get the behavior that you want. So, and then there's also something that happens with free. Daniel Ariely, who's one of the big known behavioral economists, has done experiments. He did his experiment at MIT where students were offered Lindt truffles for $1 less than they normally paid, and they were offered Hershey's Kisses for a penny instead of 2 cents. Well, people chose the Lindt truffle because it was actually a bigger discount. But then when they offered the Hershey's Kisses for free versus the Lindt truffle at 25 cents, people went nuts on the free for Hershey's Kisses. According to pure rational economics, they should have been buying the Lindt truffle because it was $1.75 off of a Lindt truffle versus it was 2 cents off of a Hershey's Kiss. So something happens when free is in the mix, and so changing that is going to be a big cultural shift for a lot of companies.
Now I'm hungry. Thank you. Yeah, no, I think, look, when I think about big cultural change, it's implementing an ERP, it's putting in an e-commerce system, it's implementing pricing software or a new pricing program so that you manage margins better. It's, installing category management in a company that didn't have one. But this is right up there with those, and maybe is bigger than any of them. And it's going to take an enlightened leader who's able to withstand a lot of heat and at the same time empathize and communicate well. It's not going to happen as a pronouncement. It's going to happen as a combination of cultural change, incentive / compensation changes, specific strategies, productizing services, figuring out which services to add and sunset. I mean, it's a big project. I just think it's essential. And like I said, a survival strategy.
Well, and as we've discussed before, depending on the service that you're doing, you may be starting to trod on your customers' value of what they do, right?
Sure.
So you have to be thoughtful about where you are effectively forward integrating as part of the change. So it's not just within your it's not just intramural, it's intramural between you.
Yeah. You and I talked to an HVAC contractor, right? Or excuse me, an HVAC distributor, and they were doing HVAC installations on commercial buildings.
Right.
And they've expected their contractors blow up, but they didn't because there was so much demand in the marketplace. Yeah. We should probably wrap up unless you've got one more quick one.
Well, I think this is quick. Would you consider warranty a service in some instances?
It depends. If you're administering warranty claims on behalf of customers, yeah, I think it is a service. I think if you offer your own warranty in addition to the manufacturer's warranty, like, we'll exchange anything within a year, regardless of whatever the warranty is for the manufacturer, which is what we did when I was at Grainger a million years ago. I do think those are value-added services, yes, because you're getting the customer back in business easily.
Good.
We will wrap up. If you want to talk to Jonathan or me, our contact information is on the right. I'm Ian Heller, the Chief Strategy Officer at Distribution Strategy Group. Jonathan Bine is the Managing Partner, the big man, my business partner at Distribution Strategy Group. If you'd like to talk to NAW, Trish Lilly is the Chief Thought Leadership Officer. Ruth Stadius is the VP of Thought Leadership. If you want to sponsor our last installment in this series, you can contact them. In any case, you can get all of the reports and the webinars at naw.org/howtechwilltransform. We'd love to get input from you on this and the other parts of this series. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. And finally, 2020 is coming to an end, and hopefully 2021 will be a better year, and we'll see you, I hope, on our January webinar. Thanks, everyone.